Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is an author and a Zen and meditation teacher, Clifford Stevens. You can find out more about Clifford Stevens and his work at findtheseeker.com. Clifford Stevens is the author of his new book, Find the Seeker. Welcome, Clifford Stevens.
Thank you, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Clifford, what exactly is Zen? Is Zen a philosophy or is it a religion?
Catherine, Zen is not a religion. We can say it is the basis for a religion because it deals with the spiritual dimension that all people share. It's beyond all faith and all confessions. It is definitely not a religion because it basically tells people to delve within to their inner guru, to their self within. And therefore, they do not need an intermediary or an institution or a teacher. And so it is definitely not an institution, it's not a religion. We say it's the basis of all religion.
So is Zen a philosophy? How would you describe Zen? If it's not a religion, what is Zen?
Well, Zen is a concept. It's a word, of course, which doesn't help people who want to understand what Zen is about. The basic idea in Zen is that everybody is pure, unconditional being, and that people already are what they're seeking, In other words, enlightenment, or in this case, I would say spiritual healing, is not something you have to attain. It's something that is already within you, okay? And this basically means that each of us, as we say, has the Buddha nature. We're unconditional, we're absolute, and this is something you can experience firsthand in yourself. And Zen actually gives you the tools to make this possible,
So then Zen, you would say, is actually a philosophy.
Well, I don't terribly enjoy the word philosophy for the simple reason that philosophy is something we associate with thinking, okay? And Zen is definitely not something which is based on thinking. In fact, what Zen says is you have to let go of your thinking and your thought processes and your ego processes. And delving within is something which the mind, our intellects, our ego, our mind cannot do for us. And philosophy has hurt people on their spiritual path because philosophy gives people the idea that their thinking can lead them to enlightenment or can lead them to healing. And this is definitely not the case. In fact, the mind is one of the causes of our suffering, one of the causes of the fact that we become ill, and the mind blocks us from healing.
I really, really appreciate that you just explained this, Clifford Stevens. Here in Atlanta, I spent many years meditating at a Zen center, and I found a lot of peace with that. We would sit and meditate in silence for 25 minutes, then do a 5-minute walking meditation, and then do another 25 minutes seated meditation. So I know that it was profoundly beneficial. Every time you go and sit, you find a tremendous peace, whether you're meditating on your own or meditating in a group. Now, how can Zen approach, again, I understand when you don't use the word philosophy, but how can Zen help us with natural healing?
Zen is, well, first of all, I have to say that Zen and meditation is only one aspect of healing, so that when we teach it, or when the Zen master teaches it, It's part of an integrated system. And of course, we also focus not only on meditation and on not only on meditation, but also on mindfulness, on mindful living, which is basically living in the here and now. We tell people, of course, they have to take care of their bodies, because the bodies, of course, have an expiration date, and they have to take care of it. It's the vehicle for us to live in. They have to eat well. We have to learn how to breathe. And of course, we teach them it's very important to do the right kind of exercise. So it's a whole integrated system. Yeah. But how can Zen, well, I could give you lots and lots of examples, but basically, I think that listeners know that people who are worried or who have a heavy heart, who are depressed, who are sad, are more likely to become ill, okay? And maybe I'll just give you some examples. Imagine you could live without carrying around all the burdens that you have of the past, all the memories you have, all the anger and resentments and fear and negative feelings. Imagine what this would do for people's health. Imagine you could live without fears or misgivings of the future, what this would do for people's health. Imagine that all the tensions and worries and troubles that people cling on to, that they could get rid of it. Imagine that you could live in the flow. I mean, I know this is a catchword, but imagine you could live in the flow and your energy flowed freely through you, what this would mean for you. Imagine you could live throughout the day in the here and now without having all these inner dialogues taking place and cluttering your mind. Imagine you could experience inner peace and serenity. And these are all very, very specific benefits. Imagine, if you can imagine this, and I can give you a long list, of course, then you can imagine that people would live much happier lives, more fulfilling lives. And of course, this would help them to experience healing on a day-to-day basis. Of course, the body is vulnerable. The body is going to get ill. So we're not telling people, of course, that if you do Zen or do any of these techniques, they're going to stay healthy forever. This you cannot prevent, and there's no, even Zen masters get sick, and even enlightened people get sick. But we're telling them that they can live much happier lives, more serene lives, blissful lives. They have more energy, more creativeness. They're not worried, they're not cluttered, and this is a very, very, very bottom line benefits for people.
That's very powerful. And again, I know that I've experienced this myself. Every time I would go and sit and meditate, I would feel dramatically different the next day. So, again, I meditate on my own, but when you meditate in a group, in a Zen meditation group, it's quite powerful. Now, Clifford Stevens, you're the author of the book, Find the Seeker. What is your book about?
Well, the book is called Find the Seeker. The key question in Zen is, who is the person seeking? And in most religions, or rather say in most religions, you have a person and you have God, or whatever name you give to it, who's separate. And Zen basically is non-duality, which means you're not separate from the oneness or the suchness, whatever name you give to it. People give all kinds of names to it, yeah? So it's basically saying that you are part of this, or you are this boundless, infinite, unconditional oneness. You are the Buddha nature, as we say, yeah? And this is the basic message that enlightenment is something that awaits you. And the path there is simple, it's very clear. Of course, everybody has to walk it. Nobody can do it for you, no institution, no teacher. It's something you have to walk the talk yourself. This is not something which is very easy for people to accept, because people today, they want books which tell them if you do these 5 steps, if you take these tests, if you achieve these 7 goals, then you'll reach it. You cannot do this on a spiritual level. So Zen is basically telling them, delve within to your inner guru. We call it the inner guru. Delve within to yourself and find the source, but it's always there. It's not something you attain from somewhere far away. It's always there within you. You are that already. That's, of course, what the book is trying to tell people is it's not enough to have an intellectual understanding, because a lot of people will accept it. You have to take the steps. Now, you know, I don't want to say you have to take the steps. You have to do something. Simply sitting there and saying, okay, I am one, is not enough.
Yeah. You know, and for our audience, I just want to share, for when I do a medical intuitive reading, this is my perspective. There's 5 levels of your being. There's the physical body, you know what that is. The bone, the blood, the organs, the skin, the muscles, the physical. Then you have the energy body, which includes your emotion, your breath, your acupuncture system, and the chakras. Then you have an emotional body, which is the largest part of us. Emotions drive a lot of our behavior, and they can shut down literally any aspect, any function. Then you have the mind, and as Clifford Stevens explains, Zen, although it sounds like a philosophy, and many people refer to it as philosophy, it's not necessarily working on the mental level. And then you have the spiritual level. So the soul, your soul controls your mind controls your emotions control your energy, and your energy controls your physical body. So once you understand that, if you're having a difficulty, you can kind of go to the next level. So for example, I did a medical intuitive reading this week with somebody who had energy problems. And I explained to him that key problem was actually emotional. He takes great care of his physical, but he wasn't dealing with his emotional. So when we find that peace within our soul, this can have very profound benefits through all of us, mentally, emotionally, energetically, and spiritually. Now, Clifford Stevens, what experiences have you personally had with natural healing since you've been practicing Zen?
I met Zen master General Laoshi, who is, of course, my co-author, about 20 years ago. And I did some Qigong with him. Then we lost sight of each other. And then in the year 2004, 2005, my eldest son had some very serious psychological problems. And for years, he was in and out of hospitals and clinics. What happened was, to make a long story short, that in 2008, he broke out of the hospital and took his own life.
Oh,
and this was a turning point. And after this happened, very shortly afterwards, some close friends of mine died. My father died, some other close relatives, and I got very sick. I had an asthma attack. I was depressed. I was on sick leave for 7 months from my teaching job. And I took antidepressants. I went to therapy. And then I went to the Zen master, to Genro, and asked him what I should do about it. Okay? How can I deal with this? Because everyone was saying you should forget about it, or you should close it, or you should overcome it. You know, people, all the therapists have all kinds of different solutions. And he told me the story of a Zen master who lost one of his pupils because the pupil fell from a cliff and died. And the Zen master cried. And the pupils didn't know why the Zen master cried. And he simply said that in Zen, you don't suppress suffering, you accept and embrace it. It's part of life. It doesn't mean we approve it. It doesn't mean we're happy with it. It means we accept the situation as it is. And it also means we accept suffering. Yeah. And what he basically showed me was that you can embrace the suffering. Embrace seems to be like we're happy about it. You simply accept the here and now, what is, without ruining yourself, because you remember who you are. You don't forget your identity. And this is what I found to be an approach to dealing with tragedy. So it's not suppressing it or overcoming it or trying to do closure. And I went to therapy, once a week. It is embracing it from a position of inner strength.
That is a really beautiful,
Sorry.
profound story. So what did you actually do? Did you start meditating regularly? Did you start practicing Qigong regularly? What were the steps that you took?
Well, first of all, the conversation with him was kind of an aha experience. And I realized that I had no reason to ruin myself, to blame myself. And there was no reason to, despite all the sadness, despite all the things going on in your mind, I still had the right to live a fulfilled life. And some people say, okay, they don't have this right anymore. But in terms of steps, yes, I started to meditate. And at that time, I had no idea how to meditate. I had no idea what Zen was about. I just simply sat and closed my eyes and tried to find some kind of source of inner peace within me. And actually, just a few weeks after I spoke to him, I was able to go back to work.
That's very profound. And when you started your meditation practice, Clifford Stephen, how long were you meditating? An hour a day, 20 minutes twice a day? What was helpful? What provided the turning point?
Well, there are lots and lots of different meditation techniques. And when the Zen master used to, when he was living in Asia, of course, he told stories about how they were meditating like 8 or 10 hours a day. Basically, we do 15, 20 minutes at a time, and we let it go longer if we think it's good. But that is the basic, of course, when we have a meditation seminar, we do longer, but we're talking about 15 or 20 minutes a day, and this is something which I've been trying to stick to ever since then.
That's very simple, and it's drug-free and available to anyone. There's no resources.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so my 8th book is called The Difference Between Pain and Suffering. And the reason that book came about was years ago, I received the guidance and I needed to write an article called The Difference Between Pain and Suffering. I was on a car trip, got this guidance, sat down, wrote this little article in about 30 minutes. And then when I started looking at the statistics on my website, someone literally read that article every day of my life. Lots and lots of people. So I realized that a lot of people are really trying to understand, how do I let go of suffering? So, and in my book, I talked about how the pain is the physical experience. And as they say, pain is inevitable. And suffering is your emotional experience.
Right.
And so it's my experience as a medical intuitive healer, when you actually release and resolve and let go of the emotions, that's when your pain can actually go away. And I can pretty categorically say, from 25 years of experience in natural healing, that if you continue to experience pain in your body, there's unresolved emotions behind it. Now, from the Zen perspective, Clifford, why do you think people suffer and become ill?
Actually, Catherine, what Zen says is basically the same as what you were talking about, that suffering, there is pain, of course. Suffering comes from the outside. Suffering does not come from the outside. Suffering comes from the inside. And it's our reactions to what happens. And in Zen, we say, of course, there is a place in you. I don't mean a physical place. There's something in you which is timeless, which is boundless, which is endless, which is your source of inner peace. And instead of abiding there, what do people do? They abide in their ego. And what does the ego do? The ego creates all kinds of stories, creates anger, creates resentments, creates sadness, creates all the thoughts and all the emotions which make people suffer. And so in order for people to stop suffering, they basically have to stop nourishing their egos. Yeah. And in fact, in Zen, we say, of course, the ego is also just a concept, but it is part of us. And the ego drains us of happiness and drains us of energy because the ego wants to preserve itself. Yeah. And so instead of living in and abiding in the source, in the oneness, in the suchness, whatever name you give to it, in divinity, in the Tao, people focus and they nourish their egos. And the ego tells us, of course, and this, of course, ends up damaging us. It damages our organs. It blocks our energy from flowing. It causes us to suffer physically. It causes us to suffer mentally. We don't sleep well. We can't rest well. And my doctor had a medical doctor had a sign in his office which said, and basically said, when the body is ill, it means the soul is crying. Yeah? Which basically means that people are suffering, and therefore they're going to have all these physical consequences, meaning they're going to have all these physical ailments. So Zen is basically telling people to get to the bottom of it. It's giving people a framework to, how should we say, to tackle not the symptom, but the source. Yeah. And if we can live from a state of inner peace and a state of inner strength, yeah. And by the way, this inner strength is not only from us, it's from this oneness, this beingness that we share with all people, with all sentient beings. If we can live out of this, we can be much more happier. And above all, we won't get, it's unlikely that we're going to get sick as much. In any case, we won't suffer from mental sickness as much. We're going to be less likely to harm ourselves. We're going to be less likely to do whatever people do to escape from their problems. And we know what do people do to escape from their problems, of course. Drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, all kinds of methods that they have. And here we're saying this inner healer is within you.
Yeah, and again, I just really want to corroborate and agree with what you're saying, Clifford, because again, when you work on the soul level, you basically have the power to balance all aspects of your being. It's the most powerful way to heal. And when I'm doing healing work, when I work on the spiritual level, then I know that I'm influencing all aspects. Now, going back to what you described as the ego, if somebody asked me what my definition of the ego would be, I would say it's your story. What is Zen? How does Zen describe your ego?
Well, the Zen masters say that what people do from the beginnings of their lives is they build up, as you said, they build up a life story. And the people's identity, what is it? It's the image they have of themselves and the image others have of them. Where does it come from? It comes from their upbringing, it comes from their education, it comes from their experiences, and of course it comes from their thought processes. Yeah? And this false identity is what becomes their ego. And instead of, and this ego basically tells us that our happiness, our peace, our serenity depends on our successes or our failures. It depends on what happens in the outside world. It depends on what experiences we have. And it tells people that we are separate from other people also. So there's so many things it does wrong. And instead of identifying with that which is inside of us, which is timeless and boundless, which is independent of all this, it makes us live in a kind of roller coaster, life's up and downs. And so, and I've known this myself. I've seen it in so many people I know. They have these constant up and downs, things go well and they're happy. The next day, something bad happens to them and they get depressed. This is not the way to live happily.
Yes. Now, how can Zen help people to live happy and more fulfilling lives?
Well, what Zen does basically is Zen gives people a framework to live. Yeah. And it's a complete system because, as you were talking about before, it doesn't only focus. Today, coaches and doctors and therapists and all the consultants we go to, what do they focus on? They focus on the body, they focus on our mind, they focus on the emotions, and they focus on the events happening. Yeah. And Zen says you need a more complete system, which also encompasses the spirit. Yeah. This is beingness itself. This is life itself. This is the very existence. And it gives people, it's a more complete framework. And it basically says we are not what is happening in the outside world. We are not what is happening in our minds. We are not dependent on people's image of us. We're not dependent on our so-called successes or failures. So it's giving people this more complete system. It's and it's not an intellectual understanding or an emotional understanding, because if I have a thought, if I think about something that makes me happy, it could be that in 2 weeks from now I'm going to have a different opinion. And what's going to happen? And the basis for my happiness is gone. And the same thing with emotions. I may get high, maybe joyful because something good happens, and then a few days later, just the opposite happens. So we're giving people I'll use the word solution, a basis, which is always with them, which is not depending on the outside world. And in fact, one of the things that Zen says is the only constant thing in life is change. Yeah. And it is very difficult for people because we cling, we want to avoid things which are unpleasant. We do everything we do which is unpleasant. And we divert ourselves from everything which is unpleasant by looking for entertainment or diversion. And we try to imitate and repeat things which are pleasant. And we cling to this. But everything in the world is impermanent, it's only temporary. Yeah. What is permanent and what does not change? It is only one thing which is permanent and which does not change. And that is the one self in us. The one, Zen says, the one mind, the one self, the Tao, God, whatever name you give it. This is the only thing in us which is not changing, which is timeless. And therefore, in the Bible, it says, the kingdom of God is within you. The Greeks used to say, know thyself. Yeah. And this is what Zen is telling people. You have the opportunity to know yourself, but here we're not talking about the little self, meaning Clifford or Catherine or anyone else. We're talking about the one self. So it's giving people a system or a framework which can help them in any situation.
Now, what does it mean to be self-confident and self-empowered?
Well, Catherine, people today, I mean, if you look at all the seminars and workshops and books out there, and there are just an incredible amount, people are constantly now looking for help on the outside. And there are so many, I don't even know the names, what they're called, life coaches and therapists and consultants and doctors and the new kinds of professions which are springing up. And people go there and they're handing over responsibility for their own lives. And Zen says you get to the point that you take responsibility back. And this is the most natural form of healing because you're healing from within. You're not dependent on the so-called advice that anyone is giving you. You're healing yourself from within. And you don't have to rely on anyone and anything anything on the outside. And this is the ultimate solution. Any advice or any therapy cannot get to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter is your innermost being, if you want to call it soul, whatever name you give to it. This is the real heart of the matter. And the other things may have an effect for a short amount of time, but Zen is that which, and we're not saying, of course, that Zen is the only system in the world. The universe is so vast that Zen would never make the claim that it's the only system that works. And but therapy and all these people may help you for a short time, but you're thrown back on yourself. Well, you can change. What do people do? They go traveling to distant countries. They look for different forms of entertainment. Some people change their partners. They'll change the place where you live. But as Eckhart Tolle, who wrote the famous book, The Power of Now, no matter where you are always with yourself. You cannot escape from this, even though some people try. And Zen gives you the means to finally realize there is something more in you than just your so-called personality, your character, your experiences. There's a self in you, something inside, and this is something you can return to again and again, because this is what you are.
And you're referring to our higher self.
This is one of the, yes. Well, it's not our higher self, it's the one self that all people share.
Now, Zen is considered to be an age-old system. Why
Yes.
is Zen still relevant today?
Well, Catherine, life has changed a lot in the last hundreds of years, especially due to technology. But the problems people have are the same. And despite all the technology we have, despite all the advancements in medicine, despite all the social media, I'm not sure that the mass of people are living much happier and healthier and more fulfilled lives. And so the problems are still the same. And Zen and therefore Zen is just as relevant as it ever was. And in fact, people today have this idea that if they depend on their doctors, if they depend on technology and everything else, they're going to be happier. I'm not sure about this. And in fact, if you look at all the people who are suffering and having problems from social media, if you look at all the burnout that exists in companies, if you look at all the personal problems that people have, a system like Zen is just as relevant as it's ever been. So even though we have all these conveniences, and even though, how should we say, life is physically easier, and even though we have more drugs at our disposal, nevertheless, people don't necessarily live happier lives. And in addition to this, what I think is that people have moved farther and farther away from the self, from their spiritual nature. It seems to be modern today through materialism and through modern day philosophy, and we saw this in the whole hype with Stephen Hawking. And I don't want to take away anything from his achievements, because he was a fantastic individual. I don't share his view about God, and I think people need spirituality, because at the end of the day, the ultimate questions that they have, the ultimate solutions, the existential questions people have, are not going to be answered by technology, are not going to be answered for anything on the outside. And therefore, something like Zen gives people answers, it gives them a framework, it gives them a basis for living, which they cannot get on the outside.
Okay, so let's go to a practical question. Let's say someone in the audience is listening, and they're experiencing pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional suffering. What would the Zen prescription be to turn down the volume on the intensity of their discomfort?
Well, Zen is a Zen teacher. I'm not a therapist in terms of people come, and I cannot necessarily give them a solution from 1 minute to the next, and they may in fact have to go to a doctor. But, well, maybe I put it this way. When people have a specific problem, they'll go to a therapist and they'll talk about it, okay? And they'll try to get some kind of solution. Either they'll try to get a practical solution to it, or they'll try to get some kind of comfort from the therapist, some way to deal with it, Zen is a bit longer term, because Zen is telling people they are not their problems. They don't have to identify with their problems. In other words, and what it's basically saying is that if you can realize, Zen says you become the observer, the inner observer, and you can observe what is happening within you. If you can get to the step through mindfulness, through meditation, what it basically allows you is you are no longer victimized by your suffering, which you cause yourself. You see all the games and all the tricks that your ego plays. You don't have to necessarily go ride on this roller coaster of life's up and downs. And it's not something, of course, that you can necessarily do from one day to the next. Of course, in religious history, and this goes to different religions, there are stories of people who gain enlightenment from one day to the next. For most people, this is not something which is very practical. It may be a longer term, it may be something longer term. But I know that my Zen master, Genro, did do therapy, and he did try to help people. And it's basically telling people that a lot of their suffering comes from their emotions or from their thought processes, which they create themselves. And to try to get people to observe this and to realize they don't have to identify with this. So there is, I spoke a long time to my doctor about this, and my doctor said, okay, the thing is, even if you get to the root of a problem, you often still have the physical symptoms. And the physical symptom may not go away. And I realized it because I discovered many years ago the reasons why I got asthma, but I still had the symptoms of it. So it does help you in the long term. It may not help you from one day to the next. I know that Genro does not make, and I do not make a claim that we're going to heal people. We're not healers in the traditional sense of the word, but we're spiritual healers in the sense of giving people a long-term basis, framework, system that they can use.
Now, one of the things that I know about Zen is that it encompasses and embraces simplicity.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, if you go to a Zen center to meditate, it's very sparse. There's not a lot of trappings. And there's an encouragement on less materialism and less stuff. So how does the practice of simplicity help us with natural healing?
I think you have to be very careful with this concept of simplicity. There's a concept that people have of Zen, that the Zen people live poorly, they don't have to buy much, they don't enjoy life much, maybe they don't drink, some of them maybe are not married. And these are concepts, and they have no basis in reality. Simplicity is more an inward thing in the sense that Zen says you don't need all kinds of methods and techniques and prayers and rituals. If you want, you can do it, but you don't need all of this. And so, because the solution, and I'm going to use this word very carefully here, the solution is within yourself. That is the key thing. Yeah, it's not something on the outside. And so, when we do a Zen meditation And when we have a meditation retreat, of course, okay, there'll be a Buddha statue there, and we'll have some different things on the walls, but it's just to get people focused. And so the outer trappings are basically to get people focused, but it's not something that you need. And in fact, each person that you meet is the Buddha. Everything that you have is part of the oneness, because there's nothing outside of God. Nothing can exist without this oneness, without the one energy. So what do you need? You know, it's all here, right? And in Zen we say enlightenment, or everything you need, is right under your feet. It's all there. So simplicity helps us basically to say we don't have to look on the outside. And here you may have heard from Paulo Coelho, this famous book, The Alchemist, you know, sold millions of copies. And he's basically, it was a wonderful book. He basically said, you know, this guy was looking for his treasure, did all kinds of travels, and where was his treasure? At home. And this is basically a Zen philosophy. We look on the outside, we think we need all these things, but where is it? It's within us. And so we don't have to look on the outside. And in fact, Zen, we say, and people don't like to hear this, die before you die. Meaning, let the ego die, let go of this false self that you think you have. And people think there's something, you know, there's someone special because they're individual, they're different. And we're saying, you know, you're part of you are the one. And therefore, you're not something different, because this different is what the ego tells us we are. And so die before you die, which means let go of the ego and all the things which make you separate, and then do what you want. Of course, do what you want is not anarchy or chaos. It basically means, you know, there are Zen teachers who like to have a glass of wine now and then. There are Zen teachers who go to church. You know, there are Zen teachers who smoke. I mean, why is this particular behavior connected to it? It's just people's concepts. So simplicity is a big help for the very simple reason that it's basically telling people you don't have to look on the outside.
Now, how does Zen differ from other therapeutic approaches?
Well, I think we spoke about this a bit before, that in therapy you get a diagnosis of some kind. And this diagnosis means you have the body, the psyche, and the emotions. That's the basis of it. And Zen extends this also to the, whatever name you give it, the spirit, the soul, what is in you, the awareness, and it's a more complete system. And so this is one of the big differences. And this is important because what happens when people go to class conventional therapy? They get treatment, and when they get home or when they're by themselves, they're thrown back upon themselves, which means they still have themselves, you know? And Zen makes this tolerable, you know? And I've spoken to people who've been addicted. I've spoken to people who have personal problems. And what is the basic thing they tell you? There's something in themselves that they can't stand, or something in another person, or something in the outside world. Something makes them restless, angry, unhappy, dissatisfied. Yeah. And Zen gives them a basis, a spiritual dimension that they free themselves from any intermediary, from consultants, from gurus. They're not dependent anymore. And so, you know, therapy, traditional therapy looks at things from a kind of emotion, basically from an emotional or intellectual perspective. And it doesn't give people the ultimate solution. And this is what we're saying. It gives people, because people return to the center of their being. This is the bottom line. And therapy, we say, of course, that Zen, that people basically live on the periphery of life. And Zen takes them to the heart, to the very core, because it is the basis of existence. This oneness, this beingness, the suchness, this is the basis of existence. And that is the basic difference.
Now, Clifford Stevens, any final thoughts?
Catherine, I could speak for the next hour, but let me just say one thing here. People, people live in this misbelief in duality, which means they're separate. And this is reinforced by the media, is reinforced by society, is reinforced by our parents, by people around us, and by our own egos. Yeah? And therefore, they make healing into something which is very complicated. And Zen says that your basic nature, you're delving into yourself, healing from a spiritual sense, which also, of course, affects the body, is the most natural thing in the world. And this is what I think, this is what we would like to give to people, that Zen is not something which is up in the air, which is just for a few people, which is just for some philosopher, which is very difficult. It's very bottom line. It's very, very down to earth. It's something everyone can apply, and it's something everyone can be. And it's something that everyone can use to heal themselves of this spiritual malaise, which we all have. And also, of course, and it's not only a spiritual thing, because people say, well, I don't need spiritual help. I need help with this and this problem. Well, if you take this, if you use this as a basis, you're going to solve your problems, because you see the problems actually don't really exist as we thought they are. So it's a very practical system, and I think this is something we can give to people.
You've been listening to Clifford Stevens, the author of Find the Seeker. You can find out more about him and his work at findtheseeker.com. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. Find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to learn more about how you can heal yourself naturally. And remember, when you find peace within, that promotes natural healing. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.